My name is Douglas Ottenlips, and I was a lieutenant in the United States Navy. Well, I graduated from college in 1967, and prior to that, I knew that I was not going to do any graduate studies. So I determined that at that time, rather than wait to be drafted or whatever, that I would enlist. And I knew that there was an OCS program, and so I applied for that OCS program in the Navy. I had been intrigued by the Navy for many, many years, reading a lot of books, etc. on that, and historically. And I was accepted into the OCS program of September of '67. And so I finished college, I worked for the railroad for 3 months, and then I went up to Newport, Rhode Island. I was in the service from the time that I was accepted into OCS until I got out in February of '71, so approximately 4 years. Well, I went through OCS, and they did not have a boot camp per se. They tended to have more like an indoctrination week, which was a little bit of trying to get you down to knowing the basics, etc. And then there was a 4-month class along those particular lines. And at that time, I believe there was about 1,200 people there at one time, so they were really producing a lot of officers at that particular time. Well, it was the first time I'd ever flown, so that was one thing, getting up to Newport. And then walking in the first night, I came in on a Friday night, and that's typically the night that the barracks are cleaned and that. And everyone was telling me that I was going to be sorry, along with all the other people I was walking in with, so I do remember that. I enjoyed the people I was with and the company that I was part of. It was an indoctrination into the service. I went to a military high school, so I knew what to expect to a certain degree as far as the basics of how to do things. But it was being in a completely different environment, getting accustomed to being in New England during the wintertime, the routine of how things went, so I remember that. I was on the Purvis, U Purvis DD-709 Sumner-class destroyer. I was commissioned in 1945. Well, basically at that time, the Purvis was getting ready. When I boarded her in Boston Naval Shipyard, and she was being refitted in order to go to Westpac and go to Vietnam. Essentially, she had 6 5-inch guns, and that's why we were going. At that time, they were putting additional officers on board because of the type of duties that she'd be working on. So when I first went on board, it was essentially that I was going to be assistant damage control officer, and I worked in that particular routine for a while. Later on, we actually had a trained damage control officer come on board, so then I became the electrical officer and took care of the gyros and various motors on board the ship, ran that particular division. Before we went, they decided that the captain was a big proponent for DASH, which is the drone anti-submarine helicopter, and he was very much a proponent of it. So he wanted another drone operator, and so I went to Dam Neck, Virginia, and became a DASH operator at that particular time. Unfortunately, I did not graduate or get certified because we were leaving, and so he shipped me out a week before. So I got back on the ship, and the next day we left for Westpac in Vietnam. Essentially, while I was on the ship, we kind of went through the whole realm of a 2-year exercise. We left Boston Naval Shipyard. That was an experience in and of itself. We went down to Guantanamo for our refresher training, which is a pretty intense operation at that particular time. And again, you are in Cuba, but they're trying to get you ready to go. So you're trying to make sure you have all the equipment, you have all the training, you have all the mental acuity to do what you're supposed to do. And we came back from that. When we got back, like I said, I went down to the DASH school. When we got back, we went to Nam, and of course that's going through the Panama Canal. Essentially, we went across the Pacific, which was Hawaii and Midway and Guam and down into the Philippines. We were there in '68 prior to the ceasefire, so we shot up on Tiger Island, Hamat, which is north of the ceasefire line. We came back after the ceasefire was declared, so we came back at that time. We shot DMZ, the 1 Corps, 3 Corps. And then we were at PIRAS, which is a radar station out in the Tonkin Gulf. And we did a search and rescue. We stood there, and then we also chased carriers for a while. I got to go to places on that particular cruise I never would have gotten to, which was Sasebo, Japan, Hong Kong, Australia, Brisbane, Australia, New Zealand. So it was a great crew. I can't say enough about the people that I was with or on the ship with, and it didn't have to be that way. I've ridden other ships, and definitely was not that way, but it was a good crew. We did a very good job. I think we worked extremely hard, because even though, every 2 or 3 days we were refueling, every 2 weeks we were rearming, we were taking on supplies, and so it was a very busy time along those. I don't know that any particular memories. I think, just kind of going through particular instances. I mean, like I said, that being in the North Atlantic is a very cold experience along those lines. There are certain events that take place, which sound kind of ridiculous when you talk about them, but I had a watch. I had the 4 to 8 watch. It was off the coast of Cuba, and we were running around, and all of a sudden we had flying fish were all in front of us, and they started landing on the ship everywhere, and it was just kind of at sunrise, and you wondered what the heck was going on until you saw these giant black trash cans coming out of the water, which happened to be tunas, and they were chasing the flying fish. But like when I had the sonarman talking to the dolphins through the underwater microphone, when the dolphins would come up next to the ship and he would talk to them and squeak to them through the microphone. Things like that are like being in the North Atlantic, it's cold, and realize I'm the officer of the deck is staying in one spot, and I don't know why he's staying in one spot, because I got to move to keep warm. Until he moves, and I discover that's where the one heater on the bridge is, and that's why he was standing there the entire time. So things like that. The other things that I remember besides the Westpac cruise is when the Scorpion was missing. We became part of that row of ships that went from the East Coast to Africa, and to look for her. And unfortunately, that was in the eye of a very, very strong storm, almost like a hurricane type. We were taking green water above our director, which is like pretty high water, and so it was something that you can talk about. So did that, and then being in the North Atlantic in the wintertime is always exciting, so besides being cold. So yeah, I remember those things. Well, it's kind of interesting. I think when I first got on board, I couldn't really believe how small the ship was, how little room there was. And yet when I left, I didn't have any problem with that at all. I lived on the ship for 2 years. I did not have any shoreside residence or anything like that. So the ship had grown extensively bigger since I was on board. My wife comes from Providence, Rhode Island, which is right down from Fall River, and they have a Navy museum up there. So I often take my son-in-law and my son, grandchildren up there, and my brother-in-law, and they're all excited about getting on board ship. They're all interested in it, and then they don't have any idea how anyone could live in something that small on those bunks, use those restrooms, heads. They just, so they would have most likely enlisted for about 2 days, and that would have been the end of it. So, but like I said, the crew was good. The ship the food was good. I mean, there wasn't anything wrong with it. I wasn't expecting great food, and it was better than that. So occasionally we'd have barbecues on the back end, on the fantail, but food was good. You kind of grow into that environment. When I first got on board, I was always kind of interested why people would stand of an evening and watch the wake of the ship. And about 6 months later, I was doing the same thing. So I think it's just kind of an accumulation of a lifestyle, and you get accustomed to it, and it's fun. I think of the people that I served with, and I think that was the friendships there, or the comradeship, I think more so than friendship, was the most important thing. And I carry that with me a long, long time. I think that was just really, I think about those guys a lot. Not every day for 100 hours, but I do think about them on a regular basis, and I know what they did, and that always reassures me. Like I said, I worked for the railroad. I had worked for them as a summer job from high school on. When I got out of the service, I was married at the time. We were getting ready to have our first child, and so I was hoping to get a job. I really didn't care when or where or how, just something that I could advance in. So it wasn't really Navy oriented. It happens to be there was a recession going on at the time. I couldn't find a job. I went back to work for the railroad, and I stayed there for 40 years. So, and at that time, I actually got into IT, and there wasn't IT courses at that time. So it was something that you learned out of a book, and so I don't think the Navy influenced me from a job perspective. I think it did influence me from a perspective of staying disciplined, work ethic, recognizing that everything isn't going to be right, and sometimes you have to make it right yourself. It just isn't going to fall into your lap. Of course, once in a while I would fall into that thought process, but it never was true. And I think the biggest thing was I found that if things are not going well, that you need to make them better yourself. And you can, and there were opportunities to do that in my civilian life where things weren't going the way we wanted, and people thought this particular solution was going to happen. And in reality, by applying ourselves, we made things happen differently. Well, I don't think service is a bad thing. I'm sometimes amazed at how few people actually serve in the armed forces, especially when in today's society currently we make so much of it. We talk about veterans a lot, we praise veterans a lot, but when you look at the numbers, it's an incredibly small group of people. I don't know what the Navy's like now. I haven't been in the Navy for a long time. I'm sure it's different. We wrote letters home. Now you talk on the cell phone, so that makes sense. I think it's a lot kinder, gentler than it used to be. But I don't think I think it's a good occupation. I think it's good to do that service. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's a positive experience. In my case, it was. I wasn't married at the time. I think being married and having children would make it extremely difficult, and I know it was difficult on the people that were married on the ship that I was on. And I know that there were situations that came up which were not positive for them. So I think everyone's different, but I think it's a good experience. It was something out of the realm. I can go home in Missouri and I can lie about it. Most people don't know I'm lying about it, so I can have a good time with that. But no, I don't have any problem with it.